So yeah, feel free to turn on or off your camera. Yeah, welcome everyone to the Hydra working group, 21st of August. We are just getting started. People are trickling in. And while we do that, we would have actually on the agenda today a bit of a talk about like maybe what could happen or what projects we could kind of put forward for next year with in IO, Intersect, and all the other forums. But Trim is actually not here right now, so we start maybe with the other agenda item, which is basically just giving a brief update on the roadmap and some recent developments, which maybe you, Tudor, or Pi can only give a quick feedback on too, if you want. So going at this roadmap, the one in the Cardano scaling is the latest updated. What I wanted to briefly highlight is that we have released decommits, right? Tudor, you already asked about it. So this is actually available now and ready to be tried out, definitely. So shoot if you have any questions or issues.
Quick question. So obviously my brain is just on Hydra Doom right now.
Yeah.
Do you think
we should start with that?
Do you think incremental decommit is in a suitable place where we could do something like as people get eliminated from the tournament, we incrementally decommit their prize winnings?
Yeah. If the prize is in the head, you can take any UTXO out.
Yeah.
You require consensus for this, right? So this is while the head is open, and it's not after the fact and the head is closed. So this is really during the head opening.
Wait, this is during the head opening. What do you mean?
Yeah, during the head is open. Sorry, wrong tense. During the head is open, you can decommit. It should be documented.
Cool.
So
if that's not too hard to do, that could be a great thing to show off at the summit of like, hey, we just finished this and now we're using it. So.
Yeah, that is actually that should be usable and working. And also, while the decommit is pending, transactions should still be processed as usual, right? Which was a bug which we fixed only quickly before the release. So that's something which happened last month, but that's ready now. Notably separate from this is incremental commits. So we cut it in 2 releases. And here I wanted to highlight briefly that there has been a small pivot in how we're going to make this available. While we had a quite basic design last time we met, interactions with George, discussion here a couple of weeks ago led us to realizing, yes, if we would, and I think we discussed this last time, right? What does it mean to wait long enough for user funds to be available and so on, for Hydra, for a sidechain, for like auto project like Midgard and so on, right? So we discussed it last time. And I just want to give a quick note that as it already can be seen here, there is a deposit notion here. The Hydra incremental commits will use a kind of a deposit concept. So the user will put things aside, commit them to be locked for long enough time, which could be a couple of days, such that the Hydra participants would see these things pending with full certainty that this is not going to be rolled back, or there can't be double spent in 2 deposits, for example, into 2 heads, right? So we'll be waiting for this for a long time, indicated by slow here, before we snapshot it into layer 2, this is above here, and before we actually take it into the head, which is this block here below in the bottom. So we will have many deposits, which can be even independent of each other, and the head will see them ripe, actually, right? If they're ready, we'll pick things in. Taking things in is basically the same as the decommits, which requires the head to be like cooperating and operational. If one of the nodes basically is down or not cooperating, right, this doesn't work and you need to close it. So that's kind of how this is going to be done. Maybe quick question. So we basically, you see these blocks here, collect kind of opens the head and closes the head. There is more in the end and the beginning, but we would call this thing, which is about putting things down, deposits. And in case the head doesn't pick it up, right, you would be able to not redeem, but recover the deposit. Any better ideas on wording? Like a user would really just see a list of deposits or their commits maybe, and they do a deposit transaction and maybe cancel it or kind of recover that one deposit after the deadline has passed.
No, I like deposit and recover. The term we use in Sunday is cancel rather than recover. But when you, quick question by the way, when you say, so like a deposit, do you wait for a full finality window, 2160 blocks, or do you let the node configure how long they want to wait?
We want to have it configurable. Notably, this is not part of this particular feature here right now. So here we would just do the same thing as always, and not yet correctly, basically just see it. As soon as we see it, we kind of consider it there. But we want to have a follow-up, which basically says that, let me just zoom in here a bit, right? Which should be directly after this one, right? It's kind of orthogonal a bit. Or maybe you could argue this is unusable without that, but it should be like a configurable wait, delay, how many blocks, right, needed before we kind of consider a deposit being there. We could play with this minimum age or block depth, for example, plus long enough until deadline hits, right? So we can be very certain that the head actually has this fully incorporated in the head, and we don't give funds access on a layer 2, which are double spent on a layer 1 into, for example, another head at the same time, right? So, but the design is actually quite nice, and I was convinced by George here a bit, or I'm not sure he does it similar but different in his Hydra design. The interesting observation is a deposit, as it can be created by anyone, needs to be quite settled before we can hope that, or make sure that this is actually not going to change when we start to absorb it into the head. So this needs to be settled here. But for example, later, right, if we just imagine we collect one by one lots of deposits, right? It doesn't really matter whether this increment, for example, gets rolled back or not. We know that we can still apply it if it is before the deadline and long enough, right? So you can just reapply transactions because there is no other way you can actually spend this before the deadline other than into a head. So that the timing asynchrony assumption between a slow and a long time frame allows us to kind of be slow on the deposit part, but fairly quick on observing these increments, right? So we don't need to wait long in between the individual increments. This could lead to a nice user experience here, which a user will have like a latency. If you put down a deposit, you need to wait maybe 1 day, right? So we have full certainty, maybe, as you have the fully secure head, right? As you say, 1,000, what is it, 260 blocks?
Yeah, 2160.
Yeah. So if you wait for all of it, right, it would be waiting for 1.5 days. But after this 1.5 days, right, you can deposit 100 things in a short window of time, and then in 1.5 days later, all of them would be collected one by one in as fast as it can actually put transactions on the layer 1 right here.
Yeah. One thing that we're looking at for Gummy Worm is we're going to have like a similar model, and actually you're probably going to get to it first, so we'll probably just repurpose your incremental commit for deposits. Is we're going to make the decision on whether to allow it to be incremented a function that the head operators can configure. So basically you can, there's a couple different dimensions you can factor in, right? So like a $10 deposit and a $100,000 deposit have different confidence intervals that you want to wait for. And then similarly, we plan to implement kind of the multiverse view of settlement, where okay, even if it's a couple blocks deep, if it's in 10 different tips that we've observed on our Cardano node, then we know it's going to be in every alternate universe, and so that gives us higher confidence. So as you're building that out, you might have your notion of a simple number of blocks, but it'd be really helpful if that was a function that in our fork we could just replace that, similar to how we replace the sync and source component.
Yeah, perfectly. Definitely, right. So I was always thinking that the deposit workflow is something orthogonal or on top anyways, right? But when we looked at the increment, right, and how we can make this, right, this kind of, it's a native bridge into the layer 2, right? How do we design this kind of native bridging? The things we tried several designs, right? So this is only one of them. Here is another 3. And so we tried various designs in this way of writing things down, and it felt the most flexible. It's actually, you need this already to kind of have a realistic user experience there, which is not super annoying, right? Because in a realistic setting with like rollbacks and so on. Yeah, so this is something I wanted to mention.
Hi, everybody. Sebastian, are you talking about the deposit-based incremental commits?
Yeah,
Nice.
I just was mentioning that we really kind of pivoted into having this way of doing it, right? And I like really also based a bit on our conversation. There are still some differences between what do we check in this deposit, right? What kind of validation is happening? But the basic idea is the same, right? And we're kind of already kind of tapping into your R&D here, I guess. And it goes in all directions, right? So, and also Pi just mentioned that that could be something directly usable by Gomivon, for example, in a more configurable manner.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and so work is on the way actually on this one. We confirmed the naming just now with Pi. And and if you want to dive deeper here, right, there's the what section here might be of particular interest. It kind of just speaks a bit about the high level, right? What would be the interface at the node be like? So for example, how do you actually get something in, right? So either with the help of the node, get this deposit transaction created and balanced, or do it out of band. And ultimately, the node will be, how would you pick it up, right? How would you see what is currently pending and so on? So that is, if there is any input on this specifically, that would be much appreciated. Of course, if you find flaws in our design here, and further in our like write-ups of the tech spec and so on, of course, that's too. But most immediate would be really on the very high level. This is where we need user input. Okay. Put down some notes here. Trim, not here. Oh, Trim is here now. Good.
Yes, sorry, I was just in a meeting with Ricky,
nice.
and it was I couldn't.
Running over.
Yes, I couldn't cut it short.
I quickly finished this mention of that Hydra Doom was actually, I mean, probably most of us have seen it, right? So has been really
I saw it. It was
Hydra
awesome.
out.
Yeah, and the announcement as well. So just a heads up to everyone here, since it's, I guess, relevant for everyone. We're figuring out if we can get this, the Hydra the Doom tournament, the next step for the summit, if it's realistic to get that out of the door, or if we have to push back on it. That's the key question, and by Monday we should have that settled, because there's a lot of things to do and not a lot of time.
Yeah.
Does Doom, the version that you were using, does it have networking? Like, can you play multiplayer?
It does, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So the issue is you need to have all players at the same state before we start a networked game. Right?
Yeah.
And we currently represent game state in parts on chain, or basically in the head. And if you use that for synchronization in the semantic sense already, like having game state and user inputs there fully, then this is a bit tricky because the network code actually works on it works on these input packages, which is the same we also put into datums or redeemers at least right now.
Yeah.
But it has even like deltas of them and sends them over the network. And yeah, we considered it a bit. We'll need to look into it again, I guess.
Yeah.
Depends on the
Now that
scope.
we have more time, I feel more confident. But yeah, because in principle, right, the Doom game code must already have some mechanism for dealing with latency and desync. And so if we're just making the Hydra network, the communication protocol for that, it shouldn't add that much more latency than, you know, a normal networked connection. Hydra operates in, 25 milliseconds that you'll get a confirmation. So at least in theory, and especially for like LAN networked games where, you know, if we do the deathmatch tournament, the final will be a, you know, LAN network, so we can control the stability and latency really heavily. We should be able to use that and just reuse the code that they're pointing to, like WebSockets. We can just point to the like publishing on Hydra. So
yeah. So maybe we can we pick up this talking point trend now, really, right? So there has been conversations now in expanding this demonstration a bit for the summit, right? So this is a bit of a, yeah, so we have all the things we plan to be doing already on the roadmap, right? We have this project where some of people here are already involved, and we have other things, right, which are also coming up now, or people working on, right, which is like related to technology, and then the question is what comes next year. So I would say that's a good segue for maybe your agenda item.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the so I've been thinking a lot about, you know, the roadmap and the resourcing and sort of timing of trying to put aside the Doom thing for a second, just the core head development. We've committed internally to, you know, a reasonably ambitious scope for this program increment. You know, meaning sort of this quarter. I'm not 100% sure, you know, what the confidence is on that now that we, you know, I certainly pulled a lot of focus out of that work into the Hydra Doom thing for Rare Evo, and now I have to do it kind of again. But I would like to try and not take as much resources away from the core team as I did for the Rare Evo event, just because there are a few really important items I feel to get done, so we can, you know, close the gap to version 1. Some of the nice to have features, like, you know, incremental commits and decommits are very useful to have, but I do think that prioritizing some of the, you know, potentially unrecoverable issues, right, like getting rid of those is arguably maybe a higher priority, even if we end up with a slightly, you know, truncated or simpler version 1, if that's what we're trying to get done before the end of the year. For the 2025 roadmap, though, I suppose I just wanted to do a temp check within the group on the high-level plan that I had. Let me see if I can. I don't have all of these mirror boards that I should have up, so give me 1 second.
I'm just going to raise my hand to speak after Trim, but don't let it interrupt you, Trim.
Yeah, all right. So anyway, I'm going to spend time fiddling around with Miro to find the board. You probably all know the sort of constellation map, right, of all of the different features and the Hydra universe. In a nutshell, what I think we should do is to focus on collaboration. Yes, right, this one. So instead of re-implementing something that other projects are already doing, I think we should focus on this is 2025 territory and possibly beyond. My goal, as well, I mean, the goal is the full Hydra vision, right? That's the ultimate goal. And I do think that for the core Hydra team, the intermediate goal there should be the interhead Hydra parts there, the virtual heads, if you will. And we need to scope out sort of, how far are we actually going to be able to get there in 2025? Which direction should we really go? But I think that's a reasonable sort of North Star for the core Hydra team to ask for funding from Intersect. The reason I'm saying this instead of the Hydra tail is because the Hydra tail is, spiritually quite similar to protocols like Midgard. So I think it makes a lot more sense. Yes, exactly. So I think it makes a lot more sense to collaborate with these projects that are dedicated and probably a little bit further along the development roadmap, and do this parallel development and hopefully be able to sort of connect them at the end in the full Hydra vision, with them sort of effectively replacing the Hydra tail protocol with this persistent layer 2, and then us focusing on the parts that are not being covered by others, because the HTLC sort of components, the star-shaped head network and the Hydra head network, from what I understand, that's more akin to the sort of lightningifying of the Hydra protocol that some other projects are doing with Catalyst funds. So that's sort of the why this path I think makes the most sense for the core Hydra team for 2025. And I just wanted to temp check with the group. Is there any pushback on this approach? If so, we could have a discussion about it. Otherwise, I'm going to make that one of the two parts of the proposal, with hopefully the other part of the proposal being having set aside some actual funds for collaboration, education, and actually getting products out into the wild through collaboration with community participants. So hopefully we're going to have some money that we can actually help and provide support and whatever, resource ourselves a little bit up so that we can facilitate products to market in 2025. My ideal goal would be something like 10 to 15 products, even if they're slightly smaller. But that all depends on how many collaboration partners we're able to do and sort of the different timelines, etc. Rant over. Temp check. Bye.
Yeah. I don't have any super strong opinions on that, just mostly because I think the broader community hasn't had a deep insight into all of the different Hydra tail, how that's intended to work, and so I don't know what the different trade-offs are. But I do think that aligning with people who are building other things and reducing redundant effort. So the main one that comes to mind is Hydrazoa versus the incremental commit and decommit, making sure that we're not just building different things that are different just to be different, that they are either merged into one work stream if they accomplish the same goal and are close enough, or satisfy different use cases but also provide a consistent enough interface that people don't have to worry about the details if they don't need to. What I will say is that there are basically three things that I want to ask for from the Hydra team. Two are in the very short term, and one is in the longer term. In the very short term, the two things that came up as part of the Hydra Doom demo, and Sebastian already knows this, but basically one of the really difficult things was log rotation. So we build up this huge, at some points we had 700 gigabyte log files because of all the transactions that we were producing. And so being able to, what I was doing is bring the Hydra nodes down, copy the data directory into a data-back BAK directory, bring the Hydra nodes back up, and then copy those to S3 and delete them. And I was doing that all manually across 10 different nodes. So it was kind of a nightmare, live on the convention floor. So I would really love to work with you all to kind of spec out a log rotation where we can say, okay, systematically after X number of bytes or X time limit, the Hydra node itself will say, okay, I'm going to start writing into this new folder, and then, whatever orchestration you need to do to ship those off to some archival place, I can recover without that folder. And so if you just want to delete them, if you want to back them up to S3, like, that shouldn't be the responsibility of the Hydra node, but at least kind of having that checkpointing process to say, okay, we're gonna take a breath and switch over to a new set of logs so that whatever is happening can happen.
I was skipping. Sorry, can I interject briefly? I was skipping some of these learnings and things which we're likely putting on the short-term roadmap anyways because of these applications, right? So anyone who would be like building something like a scale at big, like Hydra Doom or something which gets put into production for real, like maybe some Vine supply chain tracking and so on, right? We do care about these use cases right away, and it will basically these short-term things we'll be adopting anyways onto the roadmaps. And the question now is really, right, where should we go together next year? Is there a common path? How long will you be busy with Hydra Zoa, George, on this R&D catalyst mode? And is there maybe a common future we see there? Is Gummy Worm not only similar, but basically can be part of this plan or scope too? And a similar goes, or do we trip on too much toes by going that one path of this lightning things? Or should we rather focus or adopting these other more persistent layer 2s, which in the likes of like Midgard and CK Sync? I think we're tripping more toes there, but maybe it could also be more joint work there, right? So that's the question.
One question I have: does Hydra currently use the Cardano tracing libraries for its logging, or no?
Not right now, but we explored that, and we'll be further exploring this. And Franco wanted to do it anyways, but that's a very detailed.
If we use the Cardano tracing libraries, that basically makes it as simple as throwing in your config file what kind of logging framework you have. So you can either do like file-based logging or std out logging, basically, and it's just a few configuration parameters. It might be something worth putting into the roadmap.
I'm talking about. I don't care about standard out logs, basically. I'm thinking the event log. But anyway, in terms of like larger roadmap stuff, the second short-term item was just going to be the unresponsiveness bug, but I don't need to go into a lot of detail there. The larger roadmap thing for Gummy Worm and for kind of this alignment of initiatives, I think in many cases it does make sense for us to build different products, right? Gummy Worm is just fundamentally a different set of trade-offs from Hydra, and I do think it makes sense for it to be standalone. I think what is important there with Hydra Zoa, Midgard, Gummy Worm, Hydra, blah, 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 is that we standardize data formats and communication patterns so that these all, like, we don't have to re-implement, for example, the SIP30 connector for 10 different networks, right? They can all we should all collaborate on how does a wallet or how does a dApp tell a wallet it wants to connect to some other network, right? And standardize on that. Things like standardizing on the datums that we use in the various contracts that we do when there's overlap, so that if we build a bridge that works between the layer 1 and Gummy Worm, that same bridge could be repurposed for Midgard, right? So standardizing those elements. And then for Gummy Worm in particular, the main thing that I would like to be able to do is tweak and customize the ledger rules. So with Gummy Worm, we want to add 2 new transaction fields, fabricate and destroy, which work like mint and burn, but don't run the minting validator because we're handling that in a different way, and that'll allow us to provide a nice user experience, like with wallets and all of that, without having to create a wrapped token. And so being able to kind of plug in different ledger rules in our fork in the same way that we plugged in different source and sync would be really helpful.
Yeah, we touched on this in the past already, right? So it's good to kind of reiterate. I think we really see it as a common theme, like kind of common wallet interaction. I think there is discussion, like query layer abstraction, but it was more about like whether you're using like Maestro or Blockfrost or something else, right? But this applies to also not only like whether you're querying from Blockfrost off the mainnet or you're using this Hydra Direct or maybe something in between about this Midgard ledger state, right? So abstracting away where the info comes from and what kind of like ledger substrate it's coming from is a recurring topic that should be really front and center in any plan we propose, Trim. The question is really, maybe George, you want to chime in on, is there something we can propose for joint work? But maybe it depends if you have another point too.
Yeah, well, first I want to react to some of the things that people were saying. So, Trim, when you were showing the map, and you mentioned that, you know, some projects may be pursuing kind of the HDLC approach. That's definitely something that I want to explore. I really like that path. It's not something that I've committed to in the current Catalyst scope, but, you know, if I have leftover scope or, you know what I mean, like leftover funds or something, I can pursue in this one, or there might be a follow-up or something like that. So I think it's a very promising direction. I mean, we can see it, you know, in the Bitcoin world working, you know, fairly effectively in production. So at the very least, we should probably see if we can replicate something like that on Cardano. I have a question about Interhead Hydra, but I'll postpone that to the end of my spiel. In terms of what Pi was saying, where you know, should we how much should we still be diverging between, you know, HydraZoa and Hydra? Interestingly, Hydra and HydraZoa have kind of converged in some ways because Hydra has adopted some of the ideas from HydraZoa. And really, what remains in HydraZoa are some of the more radical ideas that I think would just be too drastic for Hydra to attempt to experiment with, right? Given that Hydra is a larger, more mature code base at this point with some expectations of API stability. So that's kind of how I see HydraZoa. It's a sort of experimental project that is attempting to try out these radical ideas, see what happens, and then report back. And then if they're showing some benefits, then they can be merged into Hydra, no problem, right? I mean, maybe not directly copied over, but you know, you'll know how it works, and you'll kind of, you know, you'll gain from the experience gained. So that was kind of the idea there. And then Interhead Hydra. So can you remind me again what Interhead Hydra is? Is that just where on the Hydra L2 ledger you sort of spin up a Hydra head, and you do it in two heads, and then you kind of through that create a virtual head that lives on top of L2, like all of the L2s?
I can take this, and yes, very much it's going to this direction, right? So if we just use this picture here briefly, as I have it also shared, like state channels, right? Multi-party, like the blue one, or the two-party, like the green one, right? Have been traditionally connected through like joint contracts, right, across into ledgers. This is like Lightning in a nutshell. Using HDLCs, there's other technologies like adapter signatures to do these kinds of things. Or the alternative is networking of these ledgers logically, and routing actions like transactions on the blue to the green one. And whereas the other technique traditionally is like virtual channels. Right, so you have a green ledger and a blue ledger. You have at least one intermediary who would act with a subset of each of them, right? And you would need to kind of any kind of things you want to commit into this turquoise head here from the blue and the green one, right? Must either exist on the green or the blue head, and this one is really goes into the end of the ability to enforce ownership on one or the other item in one or the other head. And I think interest has been very, very, this is far out. This is really, we need to dive into this, maybe using some kind of research when we basically come along slow, right, into this direction. So this is really, I think that's why it's valuable to have projects like HydraZoa or smaller, fast-moving R&D, maybe funded through Catalyst. Maybe this is not going to be the right vehicle in the future, but push ahead in some designs, and then we can maybe have a bigger slower moving body of work kind of follow its lead, right? And kind of solving some problems in production. And yeah, so Intel Hydra is something to look into a bit more. We didn't really do much. There's 2 papers.
Can I ask, what sort of scalability properties do you expect from Intel Hydra? Because I can see, okay, you can take 2 Hydra heads and you can connect them together into this virtual Hydra head. Maybe you can take 3, but are you expecting to have like a network of like 100 Hydra heads that are joined together into an inter Hydra head somehow? Or are you expecting to create these interhead sort of braids, kind of similar to what I guess Radix does, where it like braids together people temporarily to have like a quick consensus on some specific transactions and then unbraids them, sort of, like just, popping up and out. In which case the question would be, what's the overhead every time that you have to set up an interhead Hydra, for the purpose of adjudicating some transactions that want to interact between the heads, and then taking it down immediately after, right? So what like, do you have any ideas on what kind of scalability
So
properties you might have with this approach?
Yeah. So this picture is actually geared into, say, if this basic thing is on the left, right, it has some obvious limitations, right? So you can't send something from A to X using these 2 heads which exist, right? You need to go through layer 1. So the reach is limited of these ledgers, right? And connecting them through this networking increases the reach of it, and so does, at least it promises, an interhead virtual channel, where if something exists on a blue ledger, something on the green ledger, if you have an intermediary, you can create or reuse, maybe, right? There is maybe this more reusable matter. You can connect many of these together and hopefully, or you could actually transact things from A to X in this case, although A was never actually in the green head originally. So you can firstly reuse resources and increase the reach of what you can do with like being part of one or the other head. And ultimately, this would kind of overcome the isolation of individual heads, right? Ideally, it expands the scope again. And as you say, like, make braiding together is maybe a good verb for this, right? So you take these 2 heads. If you have one intermediary, you can use that intermediary, which needs to collateralize still. So that's a bit of a research topic here on the things which are basically processed. But ultimately, the goal is that even if you're on this blue head and you own something which is actually, or if you have been on the blue head and in the turquoise one, you get something which actually belongs or belonged to somebody on this green head, you could take that and then force it into either a new head or onto layer 1 ultimately. So it's kind of, it should merge again the otherwise fragmented ledger state. And that's the goal, at least, right? Not sure if this is even feasible or possible.
Okay, thanks.
Can I dig into how that works a little bit more, because I'm having trouble understanding it, or would it be better to do that offline and just have a chat between us?
I mean, we have 10 minutes more. The question is, should we use those for this? Should we? I would have maybe some small thing, as you mentioned, consistency and standardization across projects. While we explore this roadmap further, and maybe Trim has more to say, I wanted to kind of raise briefly awareness to that there is, let me just copy paste this one here, that there is, we faced this problem in Hydra Doom. So we were missing something in the API, namely like raw CBOR of transactions. And other APIs do that, include that, for example, Blockfrost. And in general, there is this like zoo of JSON-based APIs in Cardano, right? And there is at least 2 efforts to standardize here. One I know is SIP 116, which is, hey, there are so many standards, let's just create a new one. And this is going to be the unifying standard. Now there is one standard more, right? And the other thing is Matthias' effort of just taking Kupo and Ogmios and making those 2 things encoded in a common JSON schema, and then maybe others will use it too, right? So, which is more of a bottom-up approach. I think we should do something here, because with these data type formats, it starts with bigger API functionality. It goes on, right? Which is basically SIP 30 ultimately. and kind of this query layer unification, standardization. And are there any kind of hunches in one way or the other, asking the practitioners here? And if not, then we just chime in one of them ways, and let's see.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely needed. Like I said in the chat, the most annoying version of this is the like 40 different ways that the value on a UTXO is encoded. Sometimes it's coin, sometimes it's Lovelace, sometimes it just is an entry in the map. Sometimes you do policy ID concatenated with the asset name. Sometimes there's a dot between. Sometimes it's empty string for Ada. Sometimes it's just a single period. It's a nightmare. So absolutely, please just pick something that somebody else is already doing and just do that.
Yeah. Is there subsets you are already doing and like kind of standardizing on like to your users? I mean, Sunday is a DAX, but maybe it has an API and has some subset of it that kind of follows block first or
yeah, we're really pushing towards K-Z's mechanism where so anything that Ogmios surfaces, because also the Dolos and UTXO RPC APIs are staying consistent there. I mean, it's encoded in a binary format, but like the way that it decodes into data structures in memory, and the way that Ada.Lovelace is encoded instead of an empty string or any of that. Basically, that seems to be like a trifecta that's forming where Ogmios, Kupo, and the UTXO RPC is standardizing behind that.
Okay.
For me, I'm not really planning to innovate on these APIs very much, so I'm probably going to stick pretty close to to these things that Pi mentioned. And if I run into situations where they're not working for my architecture, design, whatever, I'm going to yell loudly, and we'll figure out a way to get around those issues. But otherwise, I'm fine just sticking to those kind of emerging standards.
Okay, then I would say let's just confirm the stance. The Hydra working group now would advocate for. I think this is this canonical, right? So it's just Matthias just pushed recently this into. I mean, we discussed this in the past. We actually adopted it already in some parts where we didn't want to have Cardano CLI compatibility right off the box, right? But at least there is a schema. It is in one repository people can contribute to, and it is already kind of should be matching Ogmios and Kupo, which is like two infrastructure components using web. This is all about JSON APIs, by the way. And so if it would go into this direction, this would be like within the spirit of this group, and I'll just take this as a quorum, good enough decision going forward here. All right. Now it goes. Trim. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to go back to a point about the V1 scope and basically what we prioritize in the Hydra core team, over the next couple of months until, a new arrival. What I realized, well, for the scope of version 1, I do think that that some of the highest priorities are really stability and these removing these possibilities of unclosable heads or unrecoverable states, which I realize may come at the expense of some also very much requested features, just because of resourcing and prioritization. And to me, it sounds like sorting out these critical issues of unrecoverable states and maybe sorting out some of these normalization issues that we uncovered as well during the Doom demo should take priority. And I'm just curious if it's needed, if something like cutting incremental commits from the scope of version 1 would be something that people would be willing to accept, or if we should push out the version 1 until we have that as well. If anyone have any thoughts about that.
Can we get a list of what are the unrecoverable issues that remain with Hydra Zoa? So for example, I think you have when you're setting up a head before it opens, right? If some people are like, you can get stuck, right? It can't get aborted or something. I think there was an issue like that, but that gets eliminated if you go to direct head opening, right?
Yeah. In a nutshell, we have currently on our roadmap this directly head opening. This is one piece, and the other one, which is a piece which is requiring incremental commits, by the way, right? So if you go down that path, if we need to have incremental commits, otherwise we can't commit. So that's, and as you say correctly, George, right? In this Hydra Zoa design, which is already in that state already, right? So it doesn't have the legacy of wanting to do it like in the paper, right? Because that's why the commit phase actually started to exist in the first place. And the second piece of this is making the layer 2 state always, or at least the relevant parts, representable on the layer 1, which is after the fact, right? So even if you, with incremental decommits, you can take parts out which you care about, which are lawful and representable on the layer 1. You could do that while open. But if the consensus breaks down, right, you need to be able to do that in closed stage 2. This is what we would call a partial fan-out. Both are on the roadmap. And I think the question now rather is, should we rather, I think the answer, Trim, is depends on the use case, right? If you only do payments, none of this is relevant, because in payments, you don't have this unrepresentable state, for example. Because that's
so just to confirm, if you have direct head opening and you have this partial fan out kind of approach, or the fan out where you like selectively fan out stuff as needed, right? Then you no longer have any situations in which the Hydra head gets into an unrecoverable state.
Not to our knowledge right now. So this is the known issues and known possible solutions. If you don't lose your layer 2 state, right? So which is, maybe there's some practical operational topics still there, right? So kind of keeping state available in memory and basically usable and to do the practical recovery more convenient, but basically there's no logical protocol gaps anymore, as we would believe, which would make it as a fine scope to also get audited, right? And really verify that this is the case.
Right, and direct head opening requires incremental commits because direct head opening assumes that you're opening with nothing inside the Hydra head, and therefore everything must come in through incremental commits, right?
Correct. That's the current dependency in the roadmap.
So it seems it kind of answers Trim's question, because it means we can't cut out incremental commits, and we kind of want all three of those features: incremental commits, direct head opening, and selective fan out, right? They're kind of almost non-negotiable for Hydra v1.
I suppose the only conclusion there is that we'll have to push out v1 until we have all of those, or we have to basically kind of agree that we're not able to do all of this complex stuff, and we can sort of primary use case for v1 is this very basic sort of payment channel solution, right, which doesn't run into these same problems, and then have a huge version v1.1, right, with all of the other stuff.
I would want to kind of point out, like in the past, we took the stance to say we call it version 1, and also in that's very stable and like maintained. This is what usually a semantic version 1 means, right? As soon as one use case uses this particular version in production and relies upon one or the other thing at least, right? So it requires about the feature set and a level of quality, maybe of like not being able to get stuck and so on. So in that sense, we could frame it also, right? Unless somebody just comes around the corner and says, hey, I'm using Hydra here now for this awesome vine tracking solution. This is like so much money is at stake if you break things, or if it breaks, right? We enable that use case and make sure it's possible. And this is then the highest priority at that moment until somebody else comes around the corner and says, I want to do something else, which is maybe has more things at stake in production. And with that, I mean like on mainnet, right? With using real money. And until then, this could kind of give the priorities, right? Yeah, one to V3. Yeah. Yeah, the bad thing about V1 is it's not ready, right? V2 is actually the thing you want to use. Yeah. No.
Yep, fair enough. All right. So I guess we're at the end of the hour. Perhaps we can continue the Interhead discussion offline on the Discord, the Ask Hydra Discord. Maybe we can just create a thread, and you, me, and Pi can just discuss that further there.
Definitely. An alternative could be also creating a discussion on GitHub. Let me check if there is maybe one.
Yeah, or GitHub, whichever. Yeah, GitHub might be maybe better, because then we can discuss it directly in that issue or something, or just in the discussion
we closed any
mechanism.
Interhead. Yeah, so maybe if you want, you could open one. I think we closed all kind of Interhead because too far out old discussion at some point. Can't find one, definitely.
Yeah, I guess the discussion right now is not how do we do it necessarily. It's sort of what is it and what do we expect from it in terms of, particularly for me, in terms of scalability.
Yeah.
So like, let's say I have like 1,000 Hydra heads together. How do they interact with each other now that you have this primitive of being able to combine several of them in these interhead? What do we expect to see from a network like that?
Mm. Yeah, so discussion is what is Interhead Hydra, right? I mean, I will quickly reply with this is the paper, right? This is maybe you can come up with to have a base motivation, a purpose, right? And then validate that whether this is even the case, right? And if we can take this more and more into concrete things, okay, it seems to be for purpose. It fulfills that purpose. And then we make it more concrete. Okay, this is what we would need, right? This is the technical question still to be solved. Maybe what to build out next, what kind of research prototype we want to build. And what comes out of this is probably can be copy-pasted verbatim into a Catalyst proposal and have fun.
Right, and this is the type of information that Trim and the higher-ups will need to green light, Interhead Hydra as like a flagship initiative, for the Hydra project, right?
Yeah, if we go that far, yes, something like this.
Yeah, and we'll just to be clear as well for the Intersect roadmap page, we'll probably have to scope out what's realistic to get done in 2025 as well, and wrap it up into a Hydra Prime kind of pitch, right? Like this is going to be interesting to see, because I imagine that 2025 might be just a bunch of disparate things sort of added to the protocol, and then sort of it all coming together eventually.
Okay, I need to wrap this up, and I took notes throughout, so we'll